So jet has been being used for thousands of years in jewelry making, but 100% its heyday was 1860s through the 1880s. So let's talk about jet. 'Cause it's a bitter, bitter pill that I need to swallow still. Can't believe that this is real. To be going on without you gives me chills. Welcome back, everybody who is joining me again. Thank you so much to all you history jewelry geeks just like me. And if it's your first time, thank you so much for joining me as well. Today we're going to talk about jet. It's a very interesting material, but we're going to go a little bit into the history of it because I love that part of it. And then I'm going to show you lots of examples, how to date it, and kind of how to determine whether your piece is real or not, because they're still making it today. Like, jet's not extinct or anything like that. They still make it. So let's go into that a little bit deeper. Whitby jet has been around for a very long time. It was formed during the Jurassic period and has been used in jewelry making for thousands of years. There was a Bronze Age grave found in southern Scotland that had Whitby jet actually found there. Beads, like tons, like 130 beads, which is amazing. So this stuff has been being used for jewelry for that long, just not being used as a substance or a material for, natural day-to-day living. Now, if we want to go with sort of the more recent history, which seems crazy to say since it's still 200 years ago, King George IV passed away in 1830. The Lord Chamberlain's office actually stated that the ornament shall be jet for the mourning period for King George IV. Now, the next catalyst to promote the production of jet jewelry was in 1852, when Duke Wellington died. And that threw the production of jet jewelry into overdrive. And then in 1861, Queen Victoria's mother died. But then later that year, in November, Prince Albert died as well. And it became a worldwide trend to actually wear jet jewelry. It's all black water. Dating Whitby jet may seem complicated because it has been used for thousands of years. However, most of the jet jewelry we find falls between the 1850s and the 1890s because that's when production was really at its peak. Luckily, though, there's a lot of examples out there that we can refer back to, and there's even magazines that advertise it for sale, so we can date it from that as well. However, unless we have documentation or the item is actually dated, it's pretty hard to nail down the precise year a piece was made. Now, before I go more into it, I just want to share a key piece of advice. While the insights I'm about to provide I feel are very valuable, there's truly no replacement for the tactile knowledge gained through firsthand experience. Jet has this unique warmth and lightness that you can only really fully appreciate by feeling it for yourself. So I encourage you, whenever you have the opportunity, ask vendors if you could examine their pieces of jet up close. Hold them, feel their texture, observe the details of them. Dealers in the antique community often love to share their treasures and knowledge. I know I do. All right, with that being said, I am excited to share what I know, and I hope it encourages you to explore this world of jet jewelry a little bit closer. So whenever I think of the color of Whitby jet, it just reminds me of Henry Ford saying, yeah, they can have it in any color they want as long as it's black. Well, that's kind of what this reminds me of. Jet is black. I mean, there is age-old sayings about it. You've heard of jet black hair, or that is black as jet. That's where this saying comes from Whitby jet. However, it is possible that jet comes in a very deep, deep brown, almost like sometimes seems like it's tinged with a little bit of red. So that is possible, although it's a lot more rare to see that. And not that that makes it more expensive, it's just less common for it not to be a very deep black. Weight and temperature are pretty easy with a piece of jet. It's just a fossilized piece of wood. Yes, it's prehistoric wood, but wood nonetheless. So, if you need something to compare this to, think of a piece of driftwood. You can see it float and how it's buoyant. That just shows you that it's not very dense, it's not going to sink. So, that's how lightweight it is. So, when you compare this to a brooch of the same size made of glass or stone, it's going to be a lot lighter in your hands. Also, this is not cold to the touch. It doesn't stay cold when you hold it in your hand like a stone would. And it doesn't conduct heat well either. So this is just going to have a very organic warmth to it. It's not going to be hot and it's not going to be cold. So does Whitby Jet have any fluorescence to it? The simple answer, no, not at all. So if you put this under UV light and it has a fluorescence or a glow to it, you need to start looking at some of the substitutes out there. Whitby Jet was not coated. It had no reason to be stabilized and it could be naturally polished. So we did not need anything that would add a fluorescence to it. So the scratch test is a very popular test for Whitby Jet because it has a very unique color when it is scratched. Although it's a deep black, it leaves this red, brownish, gingerbread-like streak. There are other substances that make this mark, like vulcanite, so it's not going to tell you 100% unless you know how to determine the difference between those two as well. Whitby Jet really doesn't have a smell to it. There's no real scent. I know that we can apply heat to a lot of things like vulcanite and bakelite, and they have different smells to them, but jet is not one of those materials. A lot of people say it'll have a coal smell to it, but it really doesn't. It doesn't have a smell. However, if you do that hot needle test, which I absolutely do not suggest you do, it will have a coal-like smell due to the organic material it's made out of. But besides that, it's really scentless. We know that Whitby Jet is a fossilized wood from the Jurassic period. And since it was a tree at one point, we would think it might have wood grain or growth lines in it. But it's actually been compressed for thousands of years and fossilized. So when we see a piece of jewelry that has those striations, growth lines, concentric circles, or things that we find in organic material, that's not going to be a piece of Whitby Jet jewelry. Because once these pieces are buffed and polished, you don't see any lines or anything like that in them, unless you're looking and seeing places where the tools were used by the craftsmen who created the pieces. So lines that we see in tortoiseshell or horn or bog oak, you're not going to see those sort of markings on a Whitby Jet. Each piece of Whitby Jet is uniquely carved from the larger piece that it was naturally formed from. So, unlike plastic and glass, which are often liquefied and poured into molds, genuine Whitby Jet is seamless. It's meticulously handcrafted, shaped, and then polished by artisans or craftsmen without any of those marks on there. So when you're examining a piece of jet jewelry and trying to determine its authenticity, just look really closely. If you see any of those mold lines or seams that are telltale signs of things that have been liquefied and molded, it's time to start looking at some of those substitutes out there. Now at this point, you might be asking yourself, isn't this the same thing? Now that's a fair question, but no, it's not. And it's actually extremely important. Whitby Jet has a very specific surface finish that makes it unique in all of the black jewelry that was used during the Victorian period. If I held something up to you that was slick and shiny and glossy, you would know it's probably some sort of glass material. If I held something up to you that was matte and dull, you might think, well, that's some sort of plastic or wood. Now, both of those can be true for Whitby Jet, except it also has this velvety luster to it. It's too hard to explain in words, so I'm just going to have to show you. This was a very prized material to work with. So when we think of organic materials having defects like little holes or nicks or striations, you don't really see that much in Whitby Jet. And that's not because it didn't occur with them, it's because they cut it out before they started the carving process, or carved around it or integrated it into the design so the defect wouldn't show. Now, I'm not saying that you'll never find a piece without a defect, I'm just saying it's very rare. So if you do see some of these more pronounced holes, indents, or things like that, you might be looking at pressed horn or gutta percha and not actually Whitby Jet. Also, Whitby Jet is not going to have uniform thick lines on it. 99.9% of the time, Jet was finished. And what I mean by finished is that it was sanded down, buffed, and polished. So you're not going to see big file marks or marks from grinding wheels and stuff on there. What you will see is maybe some polishing streaks and the lines that were carved into it by the artisans. Okay, so let me try to make this one as painless as possible. Since this is like a brittle material like glass, it's going to break like it. It breaks with a conchoidal fracture, so kind of like usually concave, kind of looks like it's almost scooped out. So it breaks along these certain patterns, and it happens with brittle material. So when you see a piece of plastic or something break, it usually is more like along a fracture, and these are more like a glass. There's some examples here. It is a softer material, but it doesn't chip and crack like other things. When we see like the glaze that has a lot of crazing on it, these aren't going to do that because they're not coated. They're buffed and smoothed. Now, can Whitby Jet crack? Of course, it's a natural material. So if it gets too much moisture or is in some chemicals or has a big temperature drop and rise, things like that can make it crack as well as dropping it. Yep, even the findings on Whitby Jet are unique to its material. One of the easiest things to look at is the back. If you look at the back and your clasp has screws in there, it's not Whitby Jet. 0% chance, because screws actually fracture the jet material. The clasps on these would either be glued on like the flat back surface, or a tiny little spot on each side might have had a little carved indentation, and they still would have been glued on. It would not be screwed in any way. This also goes for the bails on pendants and lockets, and even the clasps on the necklace. You can see from the examples, they were almost hidden inside the beads because they weren't able to be like tacked on there or screwed in there. Something else specific about jet that can tell you if it isn't it is that the hinges on lockets have to be a metal hinge. However, if the hinge is made as the same material as the locket, it's not going to be jet, because jet was unable to be carved into those hinges. So they didn't make hinges out of jet material. So before I wrap up this video about jet, I just want to say thank you to everybody for sticking around to the end. It really does mean a lot. I know this was a really long video and it was cram-packed with information. And that's why after the credits, I'm showing you some of the things that are going to be on the cheat sheet. so you don't have to worry about trying to memorize everything. I have it all down in PDF form for anybody who wants it. All you have to do is email me and I send you it for free. This is not a sales ploy. It's just a thank you for listening and wanting to learn more about the history and all the ways to identify jewelry. So the last thing I want to talk about is the decline of Whitby Jet. And the entire story of Whitby Jet really is just a reminder of the ebb and flow of industries, culture, the transient nature of fashion, and the impact of social changes on the world around us. And by saying that, it leads me to the first reason that Whitby Jet really did go in decline. Because when the Victorian era was waning, so was the decline of these mourning rituals that really did fuel the demand for jet jewelry. And since that demand was so high at one point, it led to the over-extraction and depleting of this resource. So when this material became more scarce, the cost went up. That's just the simple economics of supply and demand. And then imitations and competing materials came out. So we all know about the French jet and tortoise shell, glass, genuine jet that was from alternative places but actually subpar, horn, vulcanite, gutta percha. There were so many imitations out there. There was actually a lot of affluent women just walking around during the Victorian period thinking they had true Whitby jet on, but they were really just sporting a chain made of vulcanite. Although the decline had begun almost a decade earlier, when the Edwardian period started, World War I and the economic shifts from prosperity to the Great Depression really did put the last nail in the coffin for jet jewelry.
You're glowing in the dark. You're glowing in the dark. Glowing in the dark. I feel it in my heart. You're glowing in the dark. Glowing in the dark.
Who's the target? Sorry.